Hello, that was a shorter intro than I was expecting. Welcome tonight to Crowd Church. It's great to be with you again today. My name's Dan, and today I'm joined by wonderful Sharon.
Hello, everybody.
Who's talking, and she's here with me in the studio, and the wonderful Aid, and he's in his personal studio in North Wales.
That I am. Good evening, folks.
How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Yes. Yeah, good. Enjoying the fact that we've got a bit of nice weather. We always talk about the weather, don't we? But it's actually sunny, which is nice.
Aid, with your guitars in the background, I was just wondering whether you're going to serenade us at any point this evening.
Be honest, I've not actually had the time to touch them lately, and I'm reckoning they are massively out of tune.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll have to wait for that one.
Yes, that's for another time.
Another day.
Yeah. So we had Mike talking last week, and Sharon, do you want to give us a intro, or should we just? I think
I'll just get into it. I think.
Yeah. This series has just been great to just get little more insights into Jesus, his character, and all the things that, like, it's Jesus the revolutionary, all the things that are countercultural, things that are different to what was happening at the time. So I think, without further ado, you're ready?
Yeah, I think I am. I'll just get me going. Yeah. Okay, so I want to start with a photo today, and hopefully it will come up on the screen if my lovely assistant can help out. Oh, okay. That's a slight issue then. Because that was a little bit crucial to... Okay, something random happening here. He said the bit that's not working is that... Okay,
Hey,
here's my photo. Okay, so this is... You might be wondering, what is this vision of beauty in front of me? Well, this handsome creature is a pantomime horse that I made out of scrap material when I was a kid. So I was always making things, sewing, drawing, painting, knitting. At other times, I'd spend whole weekends reading. I grew trees from seeds in pots. I had about 20 until my parents insisted that I plant them out in a field or on the edge of a field. I played piano and a few other instruments. I enjoyed sports, walking, learning languages. Honestly, I had so many hobbies. Anyone else like me with lots of interests, or are you more focused? Do, as I'm talking, do chuck your comments into the comment section, like, reply to stuff that I'm saying or add your questions. That would be great. But anyway, out of all these hobbies, there are actually a couple of hobbies that Jesus tells us to get into that didn't make it onto my list. Any guesses? They are bird watching and flowers. So, well, maybe he wasn't talking about them as hobbies as such, but he does tell us to look at these things. And the question is, why? In just a moment, we'll read to find out the answer. But first, a bit of context, because today's passage begins with Jesus saying, "That is why I tell you," or some translations will say, "therefore." And I've been told that if you see the word therefore, you need to see what it's there for. Context matters, right? So the teaching of Jesus we're about to look at today comes from what's called the Sermon on the Mount. It's found in chapters 5 to 7 of the book of Matthew, with a shorter version in Luke. And in these chapters, Jesus paints a picture of what life looks like when we live rightly with God and one another. It's almost like a manifesto for life. So if you were in charge of your country, or even just your workplace, what kind of culture would you create? How would you want people to treat each other? Well, in these chapters, Jesus lays out his vision. Within that, there are 4 short sections about money and possessions, and today we're going to look at the fourth of these. The first asks, if the treasure is the treasure we're storing up, is it purely physical or is it something more lasting? It gets at that pull we all feel, either to keep buying more stuff or to worry because we don't have enough. That was true in Jesus' time, and it's perhaps even more true now with all the advertising around us. I mean, some things we own are essential, aren't they? Some things make life easier, or more enjoyable. Some even give us a sense of identity or security. But Jesus reminds us that these things don't last. They can be lost through damage or theft or just life-changing unexpectedly. Now, he also mentions moths, which, as someone with a liking for natural fibres, I can relate to this only too well. The second is a riddle about two types of eye, a healthy eye and an unhealthy eye. And it's looking at stinginess versus generosity. Don't have time to go into that now. A third is about how money can end up controlling us, whether that's because we don't have enough or we have too much. So let's read the fourth teaching on money within Jesus' manifesto and see why Jesus is telling us to take up bird watching and the study of flowers. How can these things help us? How are they relevant to the vision of life that Jesus has in mind? So Matthew 6 verses 25 onwards say, "That is why I tell you not to worry about everyday life, whether you have enough food and drink or enough clothes to wear. Isn't life more than food and your body more than clothing? Look at the birds. They don't plant or harvest or store food in barns, for your heavenly Father feeds them. And aren't you far more valuable to him than they? Can all your worries add a single moment to your life? And why do you worry about clothing? Look at the lilies of the field and how they grow. They don't work or make their clothing, yet Solomon, in all his glory, was not dressed as beautifully as they are. And if God cares so wonderfully for wildflowers that are here today and thrown into the fire tomorrow, he will certainly care for you. Why do you have so little faith?" So Jesus tells us to look at the birds and the flowers. Why? Because when we do, we start to see something of God's character. It's part of an antidote to worry. And what do we see? We see a God who is generous and cares for what he's made. He's created a world with enough provision for birds, animals, and also for all of us. Now, if I didn't do anything in my garden, within a few years, it would probably be a small woodland. As it is, I'm constantly pulling up sycamore and hazel saplings to stop them taking over. Things grow everywhere, often where I didn't plant them, because there's such an abundance of seeds, and all of that becomes food and shelter for birds and other creatures. So that's the birds. What about the flowers? Now, I've always loved flowers, and when my kids were little, I'd often stop them as we were walking along to say, "Stop and look at the pretty flowers." And now they say it back to me, probably more to humour me, if I'm honest. But flowers really are beautiful. Again, they speak of a God who doesn't skimp. He could have just made them functional, but instead he put such beauty and detail and a lot of care into their creation. So how does this help us exactly? Jesus is inviting us to look at the evidence around us in nature for God's generosity and love towards us to help us with our daily lives, to help shift our thinking and focus from the things that we worry about to something far better, to shift our thinking from where we think we can get our needs met to the one who is the ultimate source of fulfilling our needs. Sometimes our emotions or our circumstances would lead us to think that God doesn't care. Have you ever felt like that? That God isn't interested? I know I have. And sometimes we can have circumstances in life that can make us question if God really loves us, or if he does love us, is he actually powerful enough to do anything about it? Jesus encourages us that when we look at the birds and the flowers, we can see concrete evidence that he does care and that he's powerful. He's the creator who provides generously for his creatures. Whatever the reason for our circumstances, it's not that God doesn't care. The passage we read before mentions the word worry, and the Greek word translated as worry is the verb merimnao. Not sure my pronunciation. But anyway, this word appears 19 times in the New Testament, and it's sometimes translated as worry, sometimes as be anxious, and sometimes as be concerned. And it's used in both a positive and a negative way. It can be an unhealthy concern or focus on the wrong things, or it can be a healthy and godly concern on the right things. So the scripture we've just read says not to be concerned about food and clothes. On the other hand, 1 Corinthians 12 verse 26 says we should be concerned about each other. The next part of our reading today is this. So don't worry, Miriam, now about these things, saying, what will we eat? What will we drink? And what will we wear? These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers, but your heavenly Father already knows all your needs. Jesus is saying that those who don't know God can be overly focused on material concerns. And to be honest, I think those of us who do know God can also be like that. But these things consume their thoughts. Because they don't look to God, they have to rely entirely on their own efforts for their sense of security, sense of identity. And that can lead to living in a state of anxious striving, endlessly chasing material security. But to those who have accepted his invitation to be part of his family, he's a loving father who wants to give good things to his children. So, where should our focus be? Jesus goes on to say, seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he will give you everything you need. So, what is God's kingdom and how do we seek it? And what does it mean to live righteously? A kingdom is simply a place where a king rules. Now, we do have a king in the UK, but the way our monarchy works isn't really a great picture of God's kingdom, because here the king reigns, but he doesn't really rule. Whereas in God's kingdom, he both reigns and rules. He decides what's right and wrong based on his good character. So if we want to be part of his kingdom, it means submitting to him, which may not be a popular concept right now. It's not about picking and choosing the bits we like, but trusting his way in every area of life. It means shifting our focus from trying to meet all our own needs and instead trusting him as the one who provides, because the messages we hear in the world are very different. The world says, buy more so you'll feel more secure. Jesus says, that feeling of security won't last. Things can be taken away. Look to your Father instead. The world says, be someone, get more followers, climb higher. God says, you're already someone. You already have value. You don't need to climb the ladder to prove that, but you can use your position to serve others. The world says, look after number one, hold on to what you have. But we've all seen where that leads, haven't we? Anyone remember the toilet roll situation during COVID, where there wasn't any? God says, be generous. What you have isn't just for you, it's for others too. His promise is that when we live this way, when we put him first in all areas of our life, he gives us what we really need. Having needs isn't the issue. It's how we try to meet them and where our attention is. And living righteously simply means living right with God and right with people. So what does this look like in real life? Seeking God's kingdom, living right with him and with others, and trusting him with what we need. There are so many examples that I could give, but I've got a couple from one end of the spectrum and then one from the other end of the spectrum. So my friend Sue and her family have had years where money has been really tight. She's had to watch every penny. And even then, sometimes there just hasn't been enough. Again and again, they found themselves praying to God to provide. And she tells about one time when she was food shopping, picking items with the yellow stickers, you know, the like reduced ones. And she got to the self-service checkout and she just happened to turn to the woman next to her, a complete stranger, and said, "This is such a blessing." And the woman asked why. And Sue said, "God's really provided. I've got so much more for my money with these yellow stickers." That's kind of like seeing God's provision in everything, isn't it? Well, the woman replied, "Well, this is going to be an extra blessing. I'm going to pay for your shopping." She said, "I'm a Christian too." And right there in the shop, they gave each other a big hug, complete strangers.
Brilliant.
So another time when Sue's mother-in-law died, they needed to travel to the Isle of Wight where she'd been living and stay a couple of nights in a hotel and contribute to the funeral. So it was such a big financial strain. So friends helped, of course, but then out of the blue, a man who had once lodged with them briefly and who knew nothing about their situation sent them £100. He said that he'd simply felt God prompt him to do it. It's funny how many coincidences happen when we pray, isn't it? Now, I'm not saying that Christians are the only ones who are generous. I know many people who don't have any faith or of a different faith who are really generous. But I believe that when we are generous, whoever we are, that we're reflecting something of God's own heart. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got a friend who's called Mark Mitchell, and he runs the Mitchell Group, which is a really successful car business. So financially, he's doing really well. Now, a lot of companies expect long hours, put profits first, and don't really look after their staff. Their focus is on the bottom line, and it often leads to stress, high staff turnover, and sometimes questionable decisions, which are ethically a bit dodgy. But Mark's approach is different. He's trying to run his business in line with God's values, bringing God's kingdom here on earth, just like the Lord's Prayer says. He'd be the first one to say he doesn't get it right all the time, but his aim is clear. For example, the business closes on Sundays, one of the busiest days for car viewings, because he believes in keeping a day of rest, like keeping the Sabbath holy, as the Bible would say. It means his staff can be off at the same time as their families. And a few years ago, they even shut down a major part of their business because a contract change would have required Sunday trading. So from a purely financial point of view, that really doesn't make sense. But for Mark, it wasn't just about money. It was about putting God first and trusting him to provide. And there's a verse he really likes in 1 Samuel that says, "Those who honour me, I will honour." And you can also see something of that in the way that he runs the business. Last year, out of 106 staff, only 2 part-time employees left, when the industry average is closer to 30 to 40%. So why? Why do they stay? It's because people aren't just employees to him. He's changed their name actually from employees to colleagues because of the whole mindset changes the way he thinks about people. And he sees them as people made in God's image, and he treats them that way. And as a company, they support over 50 charities, not just for appearance, but out of a genuine care for other people. How would life look different if you really believe that God loves you and wants you to be generous, towards you? I like to ask myself this question. How would life look if you made living right with God and other people your main focus, partnering with God in all areas of your life, doing things his way? Maybe you already do that. It'd be great to hear how you put this into practice in your life as like an encouragement to the rest of us. But just all this sounds a bit like I'm saying, do this and life will be easy. Listen to how Jesus finishes this little section of teaching. He says, "Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." Jesus is really real with us. Life won't be trouble-free. In fact, he's promising that we will have trouble, not the particular promise that we like to take hold of. But he does give us a way to handle it, and that is to focus on today, give God what's going on today. And that's something I found really helpful last year during my cancer journey. Instead of getting overwhelmed by everything ahead, it became about what's in front of me today. What has the doctor said to me today that I'm struggling with? I talk to God about that, be honest how I'm feeling, pray it through, and then choose to trust him with what comes next. And you know what? It really freed me up just to actually be able to enjoy the day that I was in, thinking, okay, what good things do I actually have today? What can I be thankful for today without letting what could maybe possibly happen tomorrow overshadow it? So really, this is the invitation to shift our focus away from trying to carry everything ourselves and towards living closely with our generous, loving Father. As we put him first and walk in his ways, we can trust him to provide not just for our physical needs, but for the deeper things too, for peace, security, purpose, and a sense of being held. Okay, I've finished. So I'm going to hand back to Dan, although I do have another bit of paper with lots of bits I couldn't fit on that.
Oh, okay. I love that, Sharon. Brilliant talk. I think you might have listened to the same podcast with Mark Mitchell in. I did this.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, if you want to hear more about Mark, he's on the Inspired podcast, a fairly recent one. So he talks a lot more. He goes into a lot more detail about other different ways he brings God into his business.
Yeah, it's brilliant having no HR department was like countercultural, wasn't it? Where to start? And there's lots of comments, and I've written some comments. I think first, aid. What? Oh, someone got a text. Aid. What things first sort of jumped out to you?
I think the basics, just ask, put it in God's hands, like in Matthew 7, where it says, "Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, and knock and the door will be opened unto you."
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember that, in fact, Matthew 7, verse 7 gives you like 3 levels of escalation. Some things we'll ask for, and there'll be an answer pretty much right away. Other things we're going to have to seek, and it's going to take time and patience, and we'll get there. And then some things, again, it's going to take really against the odds, kind of banging on that door. Let's let's keep persevering here. But ultimately, those who ask will be answered, those who seek will find, and those who knock, the door will be opened unto them. And it's just having that faith and perseverance at our end, because we don't always get the answer right away, but they are coming at some point.
Yeah. I love how obviously Jesus brought it out in this sermon, but then you brought it out as well, the reflecting on creation. And there's been some comments on there. Alicia's said how we sometimes can forget the first artist, Jesus being that first art, or God being that first artist, that if you do just look at, it sounds funny, doesn't it? Oh, smell the flowers, look at the flowers, but they didn't have to have that detail.
No, they didn't.
There doesn't have to be that beauty, but there is. And I do love that. It does make me think, oh man, God, if you do care about these things that are literally just for days, some insects and creatures are like hours, aren't they? How much more?
I was talking to a friend yesterday about this subject of beauty. Well, it came up actually. I didn't mention this particularly. And she said how even as a child, she looked at beauty and it made her think, oh, there must be a God. And that made her want to seek God.
Yeah.
I found that really, it's interesting.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend this week about if you watch sort of nature programs, they often talk about that. That's awesome, that's all. And yet miss the awesome creator.
Yeah.
And I just think, you're using that word without knowing, it sort of making it so small, and we can make it small, can't we? And realise that he's provided that, and I love how it just leads on to, well, if he's doing that, and it's not an. I've sometimes read the verse that says, "Why do you have so little faith?" at the end of it, as a bit of a admonishment.
Yeah.
Why do you have so little faith?
Yeah, like turn off.
When you were saying it then, it just felt a bit more like, look at all those things. Why? Why do you have so little faith if you can see that? Reflecting back on it. Yeah. Different emphasis.
Yeah. Just one, I'm aware we need to bring Aid in, but just before that, you mentioned the word awe. So Matt reminded me before that a few weeks ago, Will mentioned something called awe walks, where you go out walking with the specific intention of looking for things that make you go, wow.
Yeah.
I can't remember how he worded it. And actually there's a study done that shows the benefits of doing that, like for our mental and physical health. Yeah. Anyway.
Before I bring in some of these comments, Aid, is there anything that you want to sort of share regarding sort of the awe and the things we've been talking about, this creation?
Yeah, so as you know, I'm a scientist, so when I look at this, I guess, through a data-driven mindset, when I think about what's the greatest thing that us humans have invented or done, and maybe you'll say, oh, really snazzy robots or AI or whatever, and you look at that in all of its ever so modest glory, in comparison to the complexity of a human being. And you just kind of think, well, there's, the relationship between the creator and the created.
Yeah.
The creator is much more advanced and complex and all the rest of it. So you look at the greatest thing we've done in comparison to us and think, well, we're nowhere near to being able to create anything like us. So then you're going to kind of kick that upstairs and think, wow, just how much more amazing, is God, and how
Yeah.
much more complex and powerful and awesome. And bearing in mind, the coolest thing we've done is like, after thousands of years of research and all the rest of it, God made us first time. Yeah, we'll have you two. Pop, Adam, bang, Eve, and it's like there was no research and development and preparation. It was just he spoke and it was done, and
Yeah.
voila.
Yeah. And it reflected. I love that sometimes that his image, we're a reflection of that image, aren't they? When we look at creation, it's not just a beautiful thing, it's a reflection of his beauty as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get into some of these comments. So yeah, I was saying before that Alicia said she loves some of these beautiful anecdotes that you brought across, and how the early church would have been in that same situation. So you talked about Sue and people just that lady just saying, "Oh, I want to bless you," and I think there must have been a lot of that then when we do. I think sometimes, perhaps in our modern life, we have to be a bit more intentional than. I don't know whether this is true than they did back then, because they lived in such close community. I feel that needs were a bit more obvious, whereas our needs are often
still like that.
Yeah,
aren't they?
yeah. We sort of hide our needs away, don't we? We're very isolated, and sometimes it has to be a bit more intentional. It has to be, let me pay for your shopping, rather than just you both walking to get your groceries together. Yeah.
And as I was thinking about these things, it's like, because he says, if you focus on doing things his way, that you get your needs met. And as I've been thinking about these over the weeks, I think it works on kind of two sort of levels. One of them is, if everybody is being generous and sharing what they've got, of course, everyone's going to have their needs met, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's only because we are selfish or we hoard, or there's enough for everybody. The only reason the main reason that not everyone has enough is because of the inequalities caused by people. So there's that one sense, if we just follow his teaching, we get our needs met. But also, it's like we don't live in a world where that happens all the time. Yeah. And God is able to provide those miracles in those situations as well. Not that he always does. Sometimes we'd like a miracle and we don't get one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think it works on two levels.
Yeah. 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 Alicia's also said, I think that partnering with God, although I do it quite imperfectly, helps me to A, feel less lonely in my struggles, and B, refocus on what's important, and C, give more generously and cheerfully. Yeah. If our focus is on these things, it changes. If our inward focus is on God and his creation, he's going to provide, then it helps our outward actions as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
One of the things that Mike mentioned last week as well was this whole thing about that Jewish literature was meant to be meditated on. So obviously we can focus on creation and look at that, but also the scriptures themselves are meant to be meditated on. And in each of Jesus' teachings, he'll pick up on one specific point. But then if you put them all together, you get but like if you just focus on one point, it can be a bit like, but hang on a minute, what about this situation and what about that? But when you put them all together, you get this very rounded view, and then you kind of have to mull them over, work it out. It's like, okay, how does that work?
Yeah.
But it's very much about this continual thinking and chewing it over, discussing with people to get the full depth of the truth.
I was talking to someone yesterday who's actually he's been on Crowd, and he's talk about mental health. A guy called Phil Watson that we both know, and we were talking about hobbies, or what we'd call now sometimes called mindfulness.
Okay. Yeah.
and you can sort of link the two together. And I just wondered how people's hobbies or mindfulness, this just came to me, is it something that you do to distract yourself from life, or is it something that you do to help your mind then focus on other things, like looking at wildflowers, looking at sort of wildlife? I suppose you can do both things. You could just get so in depth with it that all it is a distraction. But you can look at it as well, like Jesus says in those words, that it's mindful in terms of something to focus your time on, but it's also mindful in that it directs your focus to Jesus.
Yeah.
And I just think are the hobbies and the tasks that we do, how are they for you? Are they helping you? Are they mindful?
Yeah.
Are they directing you to God, or are they distracting?
Yeah.
Perhaps that's, I always say these things, and it's not me, saying things at you. It's like I need to look at my tasks as well.
Yeah.
Do they help me to be mindful and focus on?
That's a good point.
Focus on God.
I've got a question for you guys. Aid could start maybe. Just wondering. So I've given a few examples from friends about how they've put God first, like partnered with Him in bringing God's kingdom on earth, even when, like for Mark, it could potentially have been quite costly for him. Have you got any examples of where you've done that, or where God's provided for you? Yeah.
Oh, put me on the spot, why don't you?
You've had a whole talk to think about this.
So I work for a multinational, and in fact, I've worked for multinationals for a long time, and typically they're very open to what people think, but you've got to be very careful about what you say. And as an example, where I work for now, every year we pick what charity shall we, give all this money we've been saving up for to. In fact, the last multinational was the same. And it can be any charity, but not a religious one. Of course, I've always, as an ambassador from Compassion UK, I've always brought that to the table anyway and been knocked back. No, you can't do that. It's, it's not religious. But I've never shied away from speaking what I'm thinking, biblically so, in context. So I've never tried to go out of the way to insert my faith into a conversation, but I've never shied away from it. It certainly has, if anything, had people open up to me that I wouldn't have expected, because I've, shown this side of, in some ways, vulnerability, and not just on the whole corporate, tick box, let's just, do the same dance everyone else does, because that's what we do in a big corporation. That's what I've got being put on the spot.
Okay, well, I'll move over to Dan and then give you a bit more chance to think.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when I was 16. I went straight from school and went to work for, again, multinational Ford Motor Company, quite a big company, and it was a great job, an apprenticeship, and it's the guy I started work with on that day, still one of my best mates. He's still there. 4 years into it, I really felt I should leave and go to uni. And a few people came up to me and just said, so there was two views. There was one, you're nuts, leaving this is a secure job, and that's brave, going. And for me, it was just, I knew that's what I should do. I had a peace about it. And I was just thinking when Abe was talking, I knew it was God, but I'd seen that modelled by my parents. They lived in that way. And I'm just thinking, for those of you listening, have you seen that modelled? Is this something very, very new to you to put your faith in? So for me, I could see it in my family, and that really helped me just to have that rest and that peace. But I understand that potentially you this is a wacky thought that you can have that rest. And it's been great. It's been hard. Like I look back and think I was again talking to Phil yesterday, thinking I could be almost retired by now, have this amazing pension. You know, it was a final salary pension, like a rare thing. Well, they don't exist anymore. Wouldn't have had finished at 9 o'clock or finished at 5 o'clock and wouldn't get any calls from customers.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, I do look back, but I can put trust in that I've had a great time. The people I've met in what I do now and the things I get to do is brilliant. But I did have to have that peace to know this was what I should do.
Yeah. Any regrets? Sometimes,
yeah. Sometimes there are. The beginning of this year was the hardest time I've had at business. It was like, God, this is hard. I need you to provide. And he has provided and he is providing. But it's been hard.
Yeah. Shall we see if Aid's got any more thoughts? No, he's had time to think. Anything else, Aid? Oh yeah.
I'm going to copy Dan actually. So similar move. After I graduated from uni with degrees in engineering and science, I went to work in research in a university in Ireland, and absolutely loved what I did. It was really interesting. It was developing. It was going places. But in my heart, I always knew that Ireland wasn't my home. Now, I moved there when I was 5. All of my family had moved back, and I kind of figured I'd stick around. And whenever I came to the UK, I just had this peace that I never had when I was in Ireland. And so it was something for a long time I prayed about and kept an eye for opportunities. But randomly, at the same time, I became fascinated in how the human body worked. Nothing to do with the engineering or the science I was involved in. I started, basically, I got really into climbing. I started training to compete in climbing, and then read textbooks on physiology and ended up sitting exams to become a strength coach and trainer and all this kind of stuff. But in the midst of it, and I could feel, all these different directions. I could feel the research trying to pulling me in more and get the university to fund my further masters and PhD and all that kind of stuff. But there was something in me that just said, no, even though this is kind of your ideal dream thing. And I stuck to my guns. And before I knew it, an opportunity opened to actually move to North Wales. I ended up winning a scholarship, which had a fully funded stipend and all your fees paid to go to Bangor University. And it's not long after that I met Sonia, my now wife, not in Wales. That's a different story. It's all of the things that have happened after that have brought me to where I am now. And I mean, I never imagined I would be involved in an online church back then, in something as innovative as Crowd. But if I hadn't taken that step, that and many other things I've been involved in over the years would never have happened.
Yeah. I think I've got quite a few examples.
Yeah, go on.
But one that it's one of the bigger ones that come to mind, I think. One was when I was pregnant with our first child, and I was about to give up work, and I'd always wanted to be a full-time mum if I ever did have kids. I know that's not what everyone wants to do, that's fine. But that's what we felt that was the right thing to do as well. We also had 2 lodgers at the time, but we needed one of their rooms. So we'd said to them, look, one of you can stay, but one of you's going to have to go. And they decided they'd both go. Possibly didn't want a screaming baby in the night in their ears. So we were losing my income and the income from the lodgers. And then Matt's company got taken over by somebody else. And it just became really difficult. We weren't sure from one day to the next whether he was going to be promoted or fired, and it kept changing and swinging. It was just really difficult. So there was this possibility of losing all of our income as well. And it was especially hard for Matt because he was having to go into work and it was just crazy there and all these things were happening, whereas I was a bit more removed from it. But even in all of that, there was just this sense of excitement and a bit of peace, like, okay, all of our current income is possibly going to just disappear. But we just had this sense God was going to do something. And then we unexpectedly got given loads of money by a friend who I think probably still wants to remain anonymous, it was completely out of the blue. And that allowed Matt to resign from that company and then just work on his own company for the first year. Didn't get paid for quite a while. Can't remember how long. But again, that just felt very much like this is God's provision in this situation. It's like how he just lines the pieces up for you. Yeah.
I like that word you said there, exciting. It is, isn't it? Like following Jesus it's hard, but there's times like that where there's that peace. But I do think there's that excitement as well, that because if you get to know him and you get to know how big he is and what he can do, you can go, oh, what's he got for me if this is where things are going?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, like I said at the end, there is that excitement element, but there's also that actually sometimes things can be really tough.
Really tough. Yeah.
In the middle of it, and actually sometimes life can be made worse by following Jesus. And in many ways, it makes life better, like from that internal sense of peace. But I guess I'm thinking of the extremes now, like the people who, when they decide to follow Jesus, actually get ostracized from their families and worse for some.
Yeah.
But there's all this stuff in the mix.
Yeah.
But ultimately, God is good and He's generous.
Yeah. I think Ellis has said, it can be difficult when you think you're behind or not where you should be, but it's calming to know that God is in charge and we can trust in him.
Yeah.
Again, I was talking with, the conversation I had with Phil yesterday is perfect for this talk, how the structure that we have with education and stuff is very rigid, isn't it? It's very like, you must be at this point by this year, you must be at this point. Doesn't have to be that way. And I think that does help to know that we can just put our trust in God, that something might take a bit longer.
Yeah. I think it as well, it's not just, although these verses are talking about physical provision, I don't think it's just about that either. Like I go through these cycles of being really happy with what I'm doing, and then these little niggles can just get in of being like, oh, other people my age are CEOs of companies and doing this, that and the other, and what am I doing? And oh, maybe I should go and study and get these get like more qualifications, but when I start thinking like that, it's actually all about making myself look better. And then it's like when I kind of get a hold of myself and go, hang on, what are you doing? Like readjust your focus here. Who does God say you are? When I start living out of who God says I am, it takes off that pressure to have to try and be something big and shiny. And it means that I can just go, okay, God's given me these gifts to do. So what things can I study that are going to help me do this better so that I can serve other people? And it's just a very different, it's just that shift in focus is really releasing.
Yeah.
So it's like having that peace, that sense of identity, that sense of security that comes from knowing Jesus can just shift all of the things that you do. And
I wrote it down here. You said in your talk, you're already someone.
Yeah.
God says you're already someone, and the things you buy and the things you do aren't necessarily your identity.
Yeah.
You're someone before all that, over and above all that.
Yeah. Any more thoughts from you, Wade?
Yeah, just going back probably 5 minutes now, I just couldn't help but think of James 1 verse 2. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that testing of your faith produces perseverance. I don't like trials. I don't really kind of go, yay, trials.
Me neither.
uh, I see the merit. I look back and I see how I've grown. And, if I'm honest with myself, yeah, okay, it probably was worth it. Um, but, sufferings, and I say, what we're going through right now is one of those. But there's there's a greater plan to it. We're all going to go through suffering at some point. Following Jesus is not a get out of jail free card to suffering. If anything, it invites it, because you put a big target on your back for Satan to go and play whack-a-mole with. But it changes you if you let it. If you just accept the situation you're in, hand it over to God, and not just kick and writhe against it, which, let's face it, we all do from time to time. But it produces perseverance. It produces character and depth that we would not have gotten. It produces strength that we wouldn't have if we hadn't gone through this and if our faith hadn't been tested. We just don't see it at the time.
Yeah. In case there are people here who don't know your story, are you happy to give a little gist of what's going on at the minute?
Sure. So, my wife has severe ME, and this means that she, it's kind of a hard one to describe, but if you imagine never ever having any energy, and whenever you try and do something, you just want to collapse, but you probably can't even do it anyway because you're that feeble. And over the last couple of years, I've literally watched her waste away, and watched her arms and legs look more like that of someone probably 30, 40 years older than her, as she's not been able to move. And for a long time, I just asked God, why? You've healed her in the past. You miraculously healed her back like 10 years ago. That was amazing. But why for this? And I still haven't got an answer to that. But I see how, and it's funny because the number of times people in the midweek community group tell us that they find us completely inspiring what we do, how we just get on with it, and thinking, don't feel inspiring at all. Neither of us do. But we get a glimpse into the fact that yes, what we're going through is horrendous, but those around us are drawing strength from it, and inspiration, and helping them view their situations and even kind of get through some of the things they're getting through. I genuinely hope to God that my wife is healed, and that this is a season, and not a life sentence. But God heals in his grace, and there's no guarantee he will. There are days when I think, how the heck am I going to be juggle being a full-time carer and working full-time till I retire? I'm in my 40s now, and it's hard going. What about 50s and 60s? But I just cast that into the future. That's not today's problem. And so far, God has met all of our needs, not all of our wants, because we want to see her healed, but we get through each day. We manage with what we have, and we try to find the happiness in the small space that is our lives in comparison to before. Before, we were very active people. We were big into outdoor sports. We ran a strength coaching business part-time. We competed in weightlifting. We were very active in church, with Christian charities, with music. All of that's gone. And we try to quite often just find solace in going out into nature. And believe it or not, I actually started bird watching, got some binoculars. We live near RSPB, and it just happens to be, it's mostly wheelchair friendly, so it's somewhere beautiful. It's in nature, it's quiet. And after going there a couple of times, I thought, I should probably get some binoculars so we can actually see these birds. And I couldn't tell you what on earth they are. But there's something weirdly relaxing about watching birds. Now, this coming from someone who would rather take a polystyrene board out in a storm and try and ride some waves, it's I'm surprising myself with this, but yeah, there is something calming about it.
Wow, it's Jesus' top recommendation. So there you go. I've got another question for you, actually, Aid. If we got time, Dan.
Just yeah.
It's not strictly to do with this talk, but I think it's one that's really relevant. So, Aid, you were talking about all this stuff that you're going through and have been going through for ages. And we're talking about this God of love, a God who's powerful, who has healed Sonia in the past, could do it again. Like many people at that point would have turned their backs on God and gone, I'm out. Do you know what I mean? What keeps you going with God, even though you know he could heal, but he hasn't?
I know there's no guarantees. I know he does it in his grace. I know in Genesis he handed over this planet to us and said, right, you guys have dominion over this. I'm staying out. I also think, holding on to my faith is one thing that's helped me get through this. And do you know what? It makes me a better person. So even if I've got this completely wrong and when I die, there's nothing, or it's a mega party, everyone's invited, it's like spring break. But so if I'm wrong and, there is no God, I've been a nicer person in this life and I have benefited from that in the relationships I've been able to have with people, as in people like nice people and not nice people. I've had a peace that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So worst case scenario, you know what? This has actually helped with my existence on Earth right now. However, the other side of it, and I am right, well, in addition to all of this, I still know there's something far, far better and eternal after what we're going through now. And no matter how horrendous it gets right now, this is a blink of an eye in comparison to infinity and beyond.
Great.
Wow. Thanks for that, Aid.
Yeah.
We're going to finish very soon. I think Matt's going to put the live lounge details up, so if they're in the comments, if you want to join us afterwards for live lounge, just as a bit more informal chat, then please do. I just want to finish with this for Alicia that we were talking about, but who does God say you are? She says it's such a powerful perspective giving question, and I just want to put that out there. Who do you think God says you are? I mean, I would say, you're loved, you're precious, you're an amazing creation. But if you want to get to know this Jesus, you want to get to know who he thinks you are, how much he loves you, then just put it in the comments, get in touch with Crowd. We'd love to tie him up. This is why we do it. This is why we do it, because we have a glimpse of what we think he is to us, and we want to share that glimpse with you. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to?
No, that's a great point to end on, I think.
Well, thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you in Live Lounge. If not, we'll see you next week.
Yeah, fabulous.